The Spiritborn class shipped with loads of Thorn support that allows for some interesting and fun interactions when paired with new and already existing aspects and unique gear. This build says goodbye to the use of the class's primary resource, turns core skills into basic skills that allow you to free cast whenever you want, eliminates the idea of cooldowns, and distributes Thorn damage across many different avenues. Here's how to build it. First off, I want to talk about the 3 important uniques that start this build and really help make it work. First is the Rod of Capeliki. This new unique quarterstaff turns the Spiritborn's core skills into basic skills, allowing you to cast them freely at the cost of their base damage, which will eventually be negated by the amount of poison damage and thorns you'll be applying. This quarterstaff also has an implicit that grants you high block chances that are important to Thorns infliction. Second is Razor Plate, an oldie but goodie. This one is a must in any Thorns build since it gives you so many Thorns and has a small chance for them to deal more than 100% of its damage. Lastly is Wound Drinker, a new ring that is only equipable by Spiritborn. Wound Drinker has 2 unique effects, but the primary one we're after is gaining Toxic Skin's passive effect, which poisons enemies when they attack you, and this ring allows us to deal more damage to poison enemies, as well as them dealing reduced damage to you. Wound Drinker also increases your Thorns and will give you resources when you deal Thorns damage to an enemy, which is nice, but with this build, we aren't going to worry about that too much. Next up, let's talk about important legendary aspects that you'll want to look out for. First up is Bristleback. This will inflict more than 100% of your Thorns damage when you dodge or block an attack, and with this build, we'll be doing a lot of dodging and blocking. More on block and dodge when we get to the skill tree. Menacing aspect will keep your Scourge skill up for an additional 9 seconds after casting to poison enemies that are within a radius of you. More poisonous damage also equals more Thorns damage. The cooldown of the skill is also very low, so you'll have it up 100% of the time. Pestilence allows the Stinger core skill to spawn pestilent swarms that swirl around you, dealing poison damage. You can scale the swarm's damage through tempering and skill allocation. Infestation will, on lucky hit, also allow centipede skills to spawn more pestilent swarms that deal more poison damage over time. Might is a good defensive aspect to take, as basic skills grant 20% damage reduction. Since our weapon choice turns core skills into basic skills, this damage reduction bonus will essentially be permanent. Alright, let's dig into the skill tree. At the top, select any basic skill and put 2 points into it, and then forget that you ever did that. We're not going to use them. We just need those points allocated to unlock the next branch of skills. In the core skill branch, the only skill we want to take is Stinger. When choosing Advantageous Stinger, we'll poison monsters that make healthy targets vulnerable, increasing the damage that they take from us. Passives from this branch include Follow Through to increase basic skill damage. Remember that Stinger is now considered a basic skill thanks to our weapon choice. Vigorous, so we can unlock Balanced Exertion. Balanced Exertion increases core skill damage. Keep in mind the Stinger is still considered a core skill even though our weapon turns it into a basic skill as well. Moving down to the Focus skill branch, we're selecting Mirage, a passive that increases critical strike chance by 15% when dodging, and again, we'll be doing a lot of dodging. We take Focal Point to unlock the other 2 passive skills it connects to. First is Apex, which increases your vulnerable damage per allocation point. Second is Diminishment, which decreases the damage vulnerable enemies deal to you. Toxic Skin is a powerful poison application tool that has some cool effects. You're already getting its passive effect thanks to the Wound Drinker ring, so no matter what, you'll always be poisoning enemies that hit you. Should you choose to allocate points to this one and add it to your skill bar, it's another avenue of Thorns application to poisoned enemies. We're going to take a lot from the defensive branch, as there's a lot of useful tools here that help these skills in turn also become offensive, so buckle up. Remember, we have an aspect that applies more than 100% of our Thorns when we block or dodge. 2 skills on this branch will make it where you're essentially always blocking and dodging. Armored Hide will give you 100% block chance during the duration of the skill's effect. Enough skill points here and you'll have up to 5 seconds of 100% block chance. Blocked damage means Thorns damage dealt to enemies. Enhanced Armor Hide increases your Thorns damage outright, so that's a no-brainer. Next, you have 2 good final options for Armored Hide. Reinforced will reduce the damage you take from blocked damage. Adaptable will apply 100% of your Thorns when you evade through enemies and heal you. So whichever you feel is best for your offense or defense. Counterattack is used for the exact same reason Armored Hide is used, but has you dodging all direct attacks while active, plus a passive 10%, more if you're maxing out the skill, block chance whether or not the skill is active. We won't upgrade this skill beyond some initial skill points. The last skill in the defensive tree is Scourge. This is one powerful crowd control beast that also applies poison damage to monsters in your radius. When you activate this skill, enemies around you will be feared, making them flee from you as well as being poisoned. When you pair this with the Menacing Scourge's effect, it'll stay active for up to 9 seconds depending on your codex's level. That, combined with some later passives, will ensure that Scourge is active 100% of the time. Adaptable Scourge has a lucky hit chance to steal life from enemies it damages and heal you for a portion of said damage. Note that there is an aspect that deals plus 100% Thorns damage to enemies per second when they're moving. This is a nice pairing if you find room for it in your gear. Now for the passives in the defensive tree. Anti-Venom is meant to just unlock the skill it connects to, though it can be useful in the later stages of the game since you lose resistances as you climb through the torment levels. Nourishment increases poison damage whenever we heal, and we'll be doing a decent amount of healing thanks to Sting, Scourge, and the Spirit Hall. More on the Spirit Hall later. Select Endurance to unlock Perseverance, which gives you damage reduction per resolve stack. You'll be gaining resolve passively through Armored Hide. Patient Guard also gives you 10% block chance. We don't need its secondary effect, so we won't allocate any points here. It also unlocks Bastion, which increases our Thorns and then increases them even more when you have a barrier. Phew, okay, that is enough of the defensive tree. Let's move on to the potency branch. First, we'll take the passive Vehemence, which increases potency skill damage. Rushing Claw is a great mobility skill that charges you to enemies, great for when you fear enemies and they flee. We can have this up 100% of the time when selecting its aligning Spirit Hall choice. More on that in a minute. Touch of Death is a skill with a cooldown. Hit once and you're done, for a time. However, if you upgrade it, Touch of Death turns into a core skill with a vigor cost instead. However, with Rod of Capelk, it turns core skills into basic skills. Now you have a powerful skill that you can cast freely at no cost to you. What makes this powerful is its potent poison application. At the end of its poison effect, it'll spawn a swarm that seeks out enemies and deals poison damage to them. It'll also heal you as it poisons enemies. Yet another healing avenue. If you really wanted to use an ultimate here, you could drop Rushing Claw at the expense of your mobility. However, I wouldn't recommend dropping the defensive skills as their block and dodges are vital to both defense and offensive perks. Now for the key passive. Prodigy's Tempo is an excellent key passive that will ensure that you have nearly 100% uptime on all your skills that have cooldown. When you cast a basic skill 3 times in a row, it increases all skills that you have purchased by 2 ranks for 5 seconds. Remember how Touch of Death and Stinger are now basic skills? You essentially get tons of free extra skill points at all times thanks to this passive. The other great thing about this passive is that every 3rd strike of the same core skill reduces cooldowns of your skills by 10%, and even more so based on how many skill points you have allocated in them. This also stacks with the skill points mentioned above. Now that Stinger and Touch of Death are both basic and core skills, they buff themselves, your other skills, and cool them down every 3rd cast, all without having to spend a single resource to have this trigger. On to the Spirit Hall. The obvious choice here for your primary is to spec into Gorilla for the Thorns damage it applies to enemies when you hit them, plus the barrier gain. Nothing is better when something is equally as defensive as it is offensive. The secondary spirit will be Centipede. This provides yet another major avenue for healing when using Centipede skills. If you're feeling like you aren't too squishy, you can select Jaguar here instead as the secondary. What that will do is grant you 1 stack of Ferocity when you kill an enemy or damage a boss. Ferocity stacks makes it so you always have charges of Rushing Claw should you upgrade the skill all the way. Rushing Claw will repeatedly consume 4 stacks of Ferocity after using its final charge to give you 4 charges back. It's a nice loop. And finally, the Paragon board. For the starter board, we're going to slot in the Turf Glyph. This glyph will give you an exponential increase of damage towards close enemies for each node of strength you allocate in its radius. Further, it increases your damage reduction from close enemies by 10% when you've got enough strength in the radius as well. Level it to legendary for even more damage to close enemies. Rare and magic nodes to choose include percent increased damage, damage to elites, and maximum life increased. The Spiny Skin board is what we'll be choosing for our second board. Using a cooldown will increase Thorns damage for 5 seconds. Since we're using cooldowns often, this perk is up a majority of the time. For our glyph, we choose Exploit to further increase our damage to vulnerable enemies. Leveling Exploit to Legendary gives you even more vulnerable damage. Rare and Magic nodes increase Thorns, give cooldown reduction, increase maximum life, and increase overall damage. The third board will be the Infighter. This legendary node will grant you a stacking increased damage whenever you dodge or block, validating the choices made earlier in the build to apply high block and dodge chances. For the glyph, we'll take Consumption to increase the amount of damage Pestilent Swarms do when they spawn from spamming Stinger or spawn by lucky hit from other Centipede skills. Having 25 intelligence allocated will increase your damage per active Pestilent Swarm and Touch of Death Swarm. We'll be having a lot of those up with the skill rotation loop. Vicious Shield will be the next board and legendary node that we take, as this will increase your damage based on a percentage of your maximum life when you have a barrier active. We'll always have a barrier up thanks to our gorilla selection in the Spirit Hall. You can also increase your barrier generation through tempering to further empower this node. The glyph we'll slot is Bane to give our poison damage an extra boost. With enough strength nodes chosen, Bane will give all poison damage a 15% chance to deal double its damage over the duration. Rare and Magic nodes to pick are Critical Strike damage, damage while barriered, damage reduction while barriered, and a lucky hit chance. For the fifth and final board, we're selecting Drive. Drive increases your damage by 3% for 10 seconds, stacking up to 10 times when we move 10 meters. Since we're always on the move, have high mobility cooldown, and a high move speed, the choice was a clear winner. Socket Revenge is the glyph node to empower your vulnerable damage and your base damage rare nodes in its range. Rare and Magic nodes on this board give a lot of move speed, so they are highly recommended. Other rare and magic nodes include lucky hit chance, critical strike chance, damage reduction while moving, maximum life, and more vulnerable damage. And that's it! We'd love to have tested it even further, but unfortunately our time ran out in the early hands-on build of the expansion. The early build always had an unfavorable crafting economy, making it nearly impossible to craft more tempers or masterwork our gear even more once reaching higher Torment tiers. With this build, we were able to clear Pit level 50 and unlock Torment tier 3. On top of that, this was a fresh account, so we didn't have access to all skill points from Renown, and we're missing about 45 to 50 Paragon points from leveling and Renown. So you can imagine how much more scaling is possible here to breeze your way through the final tier of Torment 4. For more on Diablo 4, check out our other Spiritborn builds, and the best way to tackle the Kurast Undercity. And for everything else, stick with IGN.
I forgive you, child.